Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for giving up part of your weekend to join us for this South Asian Heritage Month event, COVID-19 Vaccines Ask the Experts, where we will be addressing your concerns about the COVID-19 vaccine. My name is Dr. Benita Kane. I'm a respiratory physician in Manchester, and I'm co-founder of South Asian Heritage Month, and I'll also be your host for this event. I'm joined, as you can see, by a brilliant panel of experts who have all been at the forefront of the pandemic over the last 12 months. And this includes our guest panelist, Prerana Issa, NHS Chief People Officer. We're going to be hearing from them all very soon before moving into the question and answer session. We have had a large number of questions submitted in advance, so thank you for the people who've taken the time to do this. And we're going to answer as many as we can in the time we have and focus on the themes that are of most concern to you. We're live streaming the event on our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube pages. So please do get involved in the conversation online, and we'll be keeping an eye on the comments as they come in. But please don't forget to use the hashtag #SAHMVaccine. That's hashtag #SAHMVaccine. And the event is also going to be recorded and posted online later for those who haven't been able to join us live. From a personal point of view, the motivation for pulling this event together has really been my experiences on the front line over the last 12 months. I still now continue to see the devastating and relentless impact of COVID-19, not just on the friends and families of those who've died, but also those who've survived the trauma of months of ventilation and those who are now suffering from long COVID, a debilitating and prolonged illness, which impacts on physical, mental health and people's livelihoods. And for me, we know that this is a disease that disproportionately affects our communities, and it's been very upsetting to hear that these are also the communities often most fearful of taking the vaccine. I have personally had my vaccination before Christmas. I was lucky enough to get it very early. My father, who turns 81 today, actually, it's his birthday, he had his a few weeks ago. And my dad has survived the partition of India. He survived extreme poverty as a refugee. And I now have some hope that he too will survive this pandemic, and it's a huge relief. So I'm hoping that you're going to find this a very informative and interesting discussion, and that this will help you make up your mind about the vaccine armed with the facts. So without further ado, we're going to hear briefly from each of our panelists. And firstly, I'm delighted to introduce Prerana Issa, NHS Chief People Officer. Over to you, Prerana.
थैंक यू नमस्ते अस्सलाम वालेकुम मेरा नाम प्रेरणा ईसर है और मैं एनएचएस की चीफ पीपल ऑफिसर हूँ मेरी तरफ से एनएचएस स्टाफ को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि आप सबने इस बेहद मुश्किल समय में हमेशा की तरह अपनी मेहनत और निष्ठा के साथ जी जान से काम किया I'm going to switch to English now. A special thanks to you, Benita, and the organizers at South Asian Heritage Month for once again putting the needs of the South Asian community, at the forefront. And of course, a very happy 81st birthday to your dad, Benita. We are approaching an unfortunate and tragic anniversary. It's been a year since COVID-19 entered all of our lives, forced us to change the way we live. And at this milestone, like you said, Benita, it's important to acknowledge the impact COVID-19 has had on our NHS workforce and our communities. And in this battle against the virus, we have sadly, tragically lost colleagues, family members, and valued members of our South Asian communities. But we will never forget them, their hard work, their contribution, and the personal loss to keep us all safe. And at these difficult times, it is the hard work and the resilience and positive attitude of all of our NHS and care workforce and staff and colleagues that have inspired me and my team. So for all of this, I want to say thank you. Shukriya, dhanyavad, dhonnabad. My Bengali is non-existent, but I thought I'd try. So although the last year has been incredibly difficult, the vaccine presents hope. It presents us the way out of this pandemic along with other interventions. And it's a real opportunity to turn the tide. The vaccine rollout is in full flow. The whole of the NHS is working hard to vaccinate the most vulnerable members of society and all of our health and social care staff. It's so important that our South Asian communities engage with the vaccine rollout to receive it, to avoid a double tragedy. This disproportionate negative impact on our communities, we have to make sure that it doesn't continue. And our best method to ensure tragedy doesn't strike twice and our South Asian communities are not left further behind is to engage with the vaccine. And every vaccine helps us save another life. So there are three in the work that we are doing. So I'm focused very much on, actions and engagement with all BAME communities to make sure that we are driving up information, engagement, and uptake of the vaccine. So there are three main things that communities have wanted to know. One, what is in the vaccine? Does it have a microchip? Is it vegetarian? Is it halal? And the answer is that the vaccine is vegetarian, is halal, does not have a microchip, and is incredibly safe. And although it has had a shorter development time than other vaccines, it is incredibly safe and well tested. And the second question that BAME communities have is it safe? Yes, it is incredibly safe. And the third is, are there potential side effects? And no, there haven't been side effects other than a sore arm or temperature for a day, but very, very short in terms of those two as well. So no side effects. So to help in this effort, I've been focusing on engaging, as I said, all BAME communities, but also especially our workforce in the NHS in the rollout campaign. I have a clinical advisory group for BAME staff and communities, faith leaders advisory group across all religions, and estates and facilities advisory group. And all of these colleagues are advising and guiding us in NHS England and policymakers in how we can engage better. So this provides me with direct access to experts across faiths and communities who understand the needs of our diverse society. And through listening to views, we have been able to shape the vaccine rollout strategy. So I'm really keen to hear also the outcomes from this conversation and see how we can further engage and inform and educate. We've also been supporting places of worship to become vaccination sites and worked with various religious bodies to amplify this invitation. I'm really pleased to say that the team are now dealing with over 100 expressions of interest from religious sites. And actually, I'm going to a temple, hopefully 2 temples this afternoon in North London, which are both vaccination sites, to thank the staff, to thank the team, and to see what further we can learn from that. So my closing message is, let's engage, let's empower, and let's protect those who we love and value the most. So please ensure that you leave this call, everybody who's watching, and thank you for doing that, leave this call as advocates, strong ambassadors for a vaccine, the highest vaccine take up across everybody, but especially those communities who might feel a bit more hesitant. And again, thank you so much, Benita and the entire South Asian History Month team for organizing this very important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prerana. Now, I know that you can't stay for the whole event, so thank you so much for attending and saying those words. And I know how hard and difficult the last 12 months has been for you and how hard you're working to increase uptake of the vaccine. So thanks for all your hard work and support to us all. Please feel free to leave when you have to go. Okay. I'm now going to introduce Rahib Ali to come and say a few words. So just unmute.
Thank you, Benita, and thank you to the organisers and everybody who's joined this morning. I'll just speak briefly because, of course, we want to leave as much time as possible for questions and answers. As an epidemiologist, of course, I've been following the evolution of this pandemic even before it arrived in the UK, and I think it's important to remember and remind ourselves just how unprecedented, really, and how the toll of this virus in terms of the tens of millions of people that have been hospitalized, the millions who have died, and hundreds of millions who have been infected. This is really something we've never seen before in the world or in the UK. And last October, I remember in meetings with government, we were discussing how we're really going to be able to get through this, given that we were having this endless cycle of lockdowns just as the second lockdown came in. And personally, I was not as optimistic. I'm generally an optimistic person, but I was not as optimistic that we'd have vaccines by December. I mean, I'd spoken to many people in the field. We never really developed a vaccine for SARS-1 or for MERS or for other coronaviruses. And so really it was a fantastic achievement, and really credit goes to all the scientists and the volunteers in those clinical trials that we were able to get a vaccine in record time. We'll come back to how that was achieved during the questions and answers. But I think we should all be grateful to God and to all of those who worked on that, and that we do have a vaccine, which really, as I said, there was no guarantee that would have been possible. And that gives us a way out. You know, we're all struggling, not just because of COVID, but because of lockdowns as well. And this finally gives us a way out from lockdown. The second thing, I also work as a frontline clinician in acute medicine, and sadly have seen, you know, hundreds of patients and many deaths as well. And as Benita said, you know, where I work, we don't have that many South Asians, but I've also been advising government on the disproportionate impact on South Asians. And we know it's mainly because of increased risk of infection, because of our occupations, because of the types of housing that we live in, and also because of multi-generational households. We have people working in high-risk occupations going home or going to visit their parents who often have, or grandparents who often have underlying health conditions. And that, unfortunately, has meant that we've been at highest risk. And again, vaccination gives us a way out and a way to protect ourselves. And finally, just, you know, from a personal point of view, I remembered when Benita was speaking about her father. You know, my father was also in a very high risk category. He was 80 last August. He had very severe lung disease. He was shielding for months, and he was, you know, he was terrified of coronavirus, and he never wanted to go to hospital. And he was very much looking forward, you know, to the vaccine coming out. Sadly, he died in October from an unrelated cause, and so he's not going to be able to benefit from that. But you know, yesterday my mum had her vaccine. I've had my vaccine as well, and my brother's had it as well. So, you know, fortunately, we're in a position now where we can save many others of our parents and grandparents. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm so sorry about your father, but thank you for sharing that with us. I'm now going to move on to Professor Nithya Krishnan, who's going to speak to us.
Hi, I'm Professor Nithya Krishnan. I'm a consultant transplant nephrologist at the University Hospitals Coventry in Warwickshire. I'm also a visiting professor at the Faculty of Health and Life Sciences at Coventry University. In addition, I work with various international organizations aiming to share the best practices in organ donation and transplantation worldwide. My background is in transplant immunology, and I'm very interested in improving the health and well-being of BAME communities. So I'm involved in various projects relating to that, including addressing health inequalities in our communities. Today's discussion about COVID vaccines is important to all, especially the BAME communities. As the previous people have mentioned, it is well known that COVID has had significant impact on our communities, with at least 1.5 to 2 times higher risk of death when compared to non-BAME groups. And as Raghib has just alluded to, there are so many reasons for this, ranging from social and economic inequalities to higher prevalence of diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, which is more so in our population, to name a few. So all in all, we need to protect ourselves with whatever it takes, and of course, with whatever is available. Very early on last year, I was exposed to COVID from a patient. I was one of the first ones in the country. From that day onwards, I had been in complete self-isolation for over 9 months, protecting my family members, especially my mother, who's at the high-risk category. And I know that I would not have been the only one. There'll be so many thousands of frontline workers who've had to make huge compromises in their daily life during these times. And I'm sure all of you would have had somebody, or you would have heard of somebody who has died during these last year. Only in the last few weeks, I have sort of become a little relaxed at home, as both my mother and I have had the first shot. Thanks to these vaccines and the quick turnaround COVID tests as well, that we can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel now. Therefore, I'm here today, along with the rest of the panelists, to answer your questions, clear your doubts, allay your fears about COVID vaccine, so that all our lives can return to normalcy as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nithya. And it's really great to have you on the call. We are going to move to the Q&A once we've heard from all of our panelists. So I'm going to introduce next Professor Mahesh Nirmalan, and I'm very grateful to him for taking some time out, even though he's on call today, to join the call.
Hi, thanks, Benita. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who is on the call. I'm just going to tell you a personal story. When the pandemic started about a year ago, I knew that I was in the high-risk group. I was middle-aged, I had a horrible family history, and I work in intensive care. So I knew that the chances of me getting the infection was very high. And if I did catch the infection, the chances of adverse clinical outcome or death is very high for me. So I asked myself, what can I do? So I took various steps. The first one was I focused quite a lot on my well-being, my physical well-being, my emotional well-being, my social being, my spiritual well-being. I think it's important to focus on that again so that it doesn't get lost in the noise around vaccine and the key messages around vaccine. The second step I did was I adhered to the government guidelines on social distancing, mask wearing, hand hygiene very, very much. I was very, very pedantic about it. In fact, I went overboard on many instances. I was one of the first to use masks out in the open air. And when the new variant was announced, I started using the mask. I used double mask whenever I went to the supermarket. And I'm very glad that the CDC is now talking about double mask, etc. So I was very, very pedantic about it. And then when the vaccine came, it was a relief.
I think we've just lost Dr. Nirmalan, and I think that is a sad indictment of the NHS Wi-Fi system. So I do apologise for that. We will hopefully have him back online shortly. So we'll move on, and I'm delighted to introduce Sandhya Bhattarai to say a few words next.
Thank you, Benita. Hello, good morning. My name is Dr. Sandhya Bhattarai. I am from Nepal, and I'm a junior doctor currently working at London Northwest University Healthcare NHS Trust in acute medicine. I've also worked in accident and emergency department during COVID. I'm really honored to be joining this group of fantastic panelists here today, not because I think I'm an expert on this matter, but with hope that I'm able to answer some of your questions from my experience and knowledge. Having worked at the front line at accident and emergency during the first wave of COVID, I can understand the fear and anxiety one may have about the unknown. Especially at the start of COVID, there was a lot of new information coming our way every day, and we had to make decisions based on that, adapt to changes quickly, and to ensure the best care was being provided. I have to be honest, it was really scary. And I can therefore understand the anxiety everyone is currently having regarding the COVID vaccines. We're exposed to new information every day, be it from the news, online, through text messages, or from personal experiences. Some of the information can be conflicting in nature, so it's really difficult to decipher all of these, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I really hope this event today provides a platform where some of these questions can be answered with the best of our knowledge, with a clear intention on our part not to promote an agenda, but to help you make a well-informed decision, not just for yourself, but for your family as well. I have, as a professional in a healthcare setting, have experienced and seen people hospitalized with COVID and the impact it has on them and the family. But personally, with my father having had COVID and hospitalized, I'm more passionate, and I really hope that message gets across to you today. And I'm really thankful that I've been invited to be able to speak and help somebody hopefully make a decision, a well-informed decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandhya. And, I think junior doctors are really the unsung heroes of this pandemic. They have worked relentlessly on the shop floor day and night, 24 hours a day, exposing themselves to high levels. So thank you for everything that you and all your colleagues are doing. We all really appreciate it. I'm going to move on to Dr. Manisha Kumar now.
Thanks, Benita. Hi, my name's Manisha Kumar, and I'm a GP in central Manchester, and I've been a GP in Manchester for over 20 years. I'm also director of Manchester Health and Care Commissioning and part of the senior team responsible for the rollout of the vaccination programme in the city of Manchester. Like all my colleagues on the screen, we've lived the disproportionate effect of COVID on our communities, and Manchester has over 40% Black and minority ethnic communities. But underneath that, there's hundreds of different cultural beliefs and opinions and thoughts. I was quite emotional yesterday when we saw our first phase data that we'd hit over 80% uptake of vaccines for all our patients aged 70 and above. And then when I drilled down underneath that, it was a half that for some of our communities, a quarter for some of the others, lower for women, particularly Black and minority ethnic women. And I think that reminded me how important it was to have these conversations. We've historically had poor outcomes and poor access to some of our communities. And with COVID, it's really important that we have those trusted conversations, that we start to reverse that, because it's just not, it's not okay anymore for that to be different. And anything we can do to build on that, that will be important. My personal story, my parents are in London. My dad is clinically extremely vulnerable. He has pulmonary fibrosis, and I've not seen him for a year because I'm still working clinically and I was just too much of a risk. He had his vaccination about a month ago. I've had my Pfizer vaccination. My father had AstraZeneca. And for me, the vaccination program just gives me a chance to be able to see my dad again. And that's something I think we all hope to do, is to bring our families back together.
Manisha, thank you. And we are going to hear from 2 more GPs now, but I mean, general practice has just achieved so much over the last 12 months. And, you know, we are running one of the most successful vaccination programs in the world. And I think that is due to the hard work of people like yourself. So thank you for all that you are doing. And I'm going to move on to Dr. Enam Hack now, just to say a few words.
Thanks for the invitation, Benita and the team. This is an excellent opportunity for us to make a difference and to get rid of a lot of the misunderstandings that we're seeing, particularly on social media, WhatsApp and other media. The only thing I want to talk about is why I'm so passionate about it. Right back when in March, when we started worrying about COVID, my uncle, my dad's half brother, who was only about 5-6 years older than me, was on the front line in Bangladesh, seeing these patients. All his colleagues there, a lot of them were so frightened of this unknown virus that they refused to see people. But my uncle has always been the type that wanted to always be at the forefront and make a difference. He often saw poor people for free and didn't pay any money. He went to see these patients without masks. And unfortunately, he got COVID. And unfortunately, he ended up on a ventilator, and unfortunately, he passed away. And that made me think, you know, we do need to get those messages out of, you know, wearing masks, hygiene, distancing, all these things. And I thought to myself, as a GP, as an academic, what could I do? And then I looked, and we have an organization, ASDOC, which has been for 9 years been giving information out to the local Greater Manchester population. And we thought, what can we do virtually? And my team has been amazing, Bushra, Simon, others in the team, they've been churning out nearly 150 videos over this period of time from healthcare professionals from all walks of life, from all different communities, trying to get that message out in languages that the patients can understand. So my message is this: listen to what's being said today, take it on board, ignore the misinformation, and hopefully we can prevent the loss of life that we've been seeing.
And thank you. And again, I'm so sorry about your father. I think that so many healthcare professionals and obviously people in the wider public have had such personal loss. I've lost a consultant colleague as well, and it's devastating. So thank you for sharing that with us. I just wanted to say that Dr. Wajid Akhtar, who was supposed to be joining us from the, he's the Vice President of the British Islamic Medical Association, has sadly had a family emergency. He was literally online at 10:30 and has had to go off. So we are trying to get a replacement for him, who should be joining us soon. But he does send his apologies. And I'm going to just finally move on to Dr. Carter Singh, who's going to say a few words before we move into our Q&A session. Mahesh, welcome back. And we know you had some technical issues there earlier. So Dr. Singh.
Thanks, Benita. I'm a frontline full-time NHS GP working in Nottinghamshire. I'm also a member of the National Council for the Royal College of General Practitioners, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Nottinghamshire Local Medical Committee. Now, as we've heard from everyone on the panel, we've all got our own stories to tell about how the pandemic has affected us personally. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was clear to me very early on that there was a negative, disproportionate impact upon Black and Asian minority communities, especially communities from the Southeast Asian backgrounds. And at one point, 94% of all deaths of doctors in the NHS were of those belonging to BAME backgrounds, which shocked me. And deaths in the community at large were disproportionately higher in Southeast Asian communities. And I knew that that couldn't be due to chance alone. Having spoken to a lot of secondary care colleagues and colleagues in general practice, it was also becoming apparent that we were seeing people presenting less often with red flag features of central crushing chest pain, with weakness down one side of the body, with red flag symptoms and signs of cancer. And that's not because these were happening at a reduced frequency or a reduced prevalence, but because either people thought the NHS was closed for business, or the ones who thought it was open were afraid of contracting COVID if they presented to healthcare settings. And I was aware that minority communities or hard to reach communities or people who didn't use English as their first language may suffer disproportionately due to these factors. And so I started to create videos in Punjabi to reach out to the Punjabi communities across the country, and shared these across various social media platforms, on TV channels, the BBC, Asian TV channels, and on the radio, to try and do my small part to try and increase the profile of these important issues and to try and reduce and mitigate against the higher risk that our communities were facing. So that's my personal story. I've been vaccinated. My mum, who has learning disabilities, has been vaccinated. My grandparents in their late 80s have been vaccinated. And so I wouldn't be asking any of my colleagues, friends, family to be vaccinated if I hadn't have been. So, you know, I'm putting my money where my mouth is. This is the most effective way to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your families from this awful virus. Thanks, Benita.
Thank you, Carter. And I do, I think your video that you did is absolutely fantastic. I don't understand Punjabi, so I didn't know what you were saying, but you know, it was really good. And the videos that Enam has also highlighted, we will be posting resources after the event in different languages, because we realise that, you know, people may not be able to follow everything we're saying. So I'll say something about that at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to the Q&A. There's lots of questions coming in on social media already. A lot of them we are going to cover from the questions that were submitted in advance. So going to just start off, there has been some questions around, you know, actually what is a vaccine? There's been a lot of fear mongering going on that this is some sort of genetic thing that can change your genes and, you know, it's going to somehow interfere with, you know, our genetic makeup. So I wonder, Nithya, with your experience and expertise in immunology, whether you could just explain, you know, what are the vaccines? How do they work?
Yeah, hi, certainly. But before I answer these specific questions, can I just briefly explain how the body fights viral infections so that it's easier to understand? See, viruses like COVID-19 usually enter our body through the upper respiratory tract, that is the nose, mouth, eyes, ears. After the virus invades the body for the first time, the virus replicates many a times to cause severe symptoms, and that's what we call as viral illness. It can start from being mild, like fever, you know, just feeling sniffles, etc., to actually severe COVID disease. There is usually a delay before the defense mechanisms of our body realize that there is a foreign substance in the body. But once the policeman cells, called the white blood cells, recognizes the foreign virus, it immediately activates and recruits different types of cells to kill it. Some will attack and kill the infected cells directly. Some will produce antibodies to kill the virus. Almost all of those cells would die after the job is done. However, a few cells which produce the antibodies which specifically act against the virus would live for a longer time. And these are called the memory cells. If a person gets exposed to the same virus sometime later, these memory cells will act quickly to mount a response against the particular virus, and therefore the symptoms, if any, would be milder, much milder. A vaccine is a substance which, when given, prepares our immune system to fight against the infection by creating these memory cells in advance, so that if we were exposed to the virus at a later date, we would be able to clear the virus from our system as soon as possible. So that's how the vaccine works.
Yeah, and the technology used is absolutely phenomenal, and so clever. I think there's some concerns about this, it messes with your genetic information. Nithya, what would you say about that? Sorry, I'll just unmute you.
That's all right, yeah. So yes, now, one thing is there are many preparations of COVID vaccine, but let me tell you, none of them, I repeat, will or can alter our genes in any way or form. The reason being, the vaccine, when injected into our body, it instructs our body cells to make a protein that is unique to COVID virus. So after our cells have used the instructions and have made the copies of the protein, the substance from the vaccine is destroyed. Our immune system recognizes this protein as foreign and elicits a response producing memory cells so that it is equipped to fight against COVID, as I've just described. So the various vaccines differ in the way of instructions that are delivered to the body cells, but the rest of the process is the same. To give you a crude example, it's like when you're hosting a dinner. Say you're the main cook, but if you ask your child to set up the table and you give them the specific instructions, they will set the table, and that too according to your specific instructions. They are not going to mess with the menu or the cooking. So once their job is done, they will vanish. That's exactly what happens with the vaccines.
I don't know. You must have brought your children up better than mine. They certainly don't lay the table how I instruct them. But thank you for that lovely analogy there, Nithya, and that simple explanation. And there is also some concern. There's been some questions coming in about, will if it's specifically for the COVID vaccine, will it work again? I just wonder if I could bring in Dr. Ali to talk about that.
Sure. So, of course, there's been a lot of publicity about variants both from the UK, the Kent variant, and others that we've come across, and also Brazil and South Africa. And this is a feature of all viruses, that they do mutate, and we're all familiar with the flu virus. And the reason we have annual flu shots is because the virus does mutate, and so we need to update it every year because of that mutation. So coronaviruses actually don't mutate as quickly as influenza. So those mutations that we've seen are actually less than we normally see with flu. But it is true that these mutations do have an impact, as we've seen in the UK, on how quickly the virus can transmit, whether it could cause more severe disease. And particularly the Brazilian and South African variant, there is some evidence that the vaccines are not as effective, or some vaccines are not as effective against those variants as you've seen. And that's why we've got border controls going up now to stop those variants coming into the UK. But having said that, it's not that they don't work at all. So in fact, having the vaccine will still protect you against those new variants. The evidence is still accumulating, but there's already good evidence, particularly for the Pfizer vaccine on the South African variant, but also the AstraZeneca vaccine for the UK variant, that they work very well. So we should not be concerned that this vaccine will not work against the variants. We shouldn't wait for a new version to come out. We should take the vaccine now. As and when the virus mutates in the future, then of course next winter it may be necessary to take another annual shot for the COVID vaccine, as we do for flu. But as I said, we should definitely take the vaccine now and not wait.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. And I think the point is, it's a lot safer than not having the vaccine at all in protecting you against the variants. So yeah, that's a good explanation. Thank you very much. Okay, did anybody else want to come in and say a few words about that? Shall we move on? I think we've covered those. I just wanted to introduce Dr. Amma Hamid, who has at very short notice replaced Dr. Wajid Akhtar. He's having a few technical issues, so I apologise that if he's jumping in and out, but welcome, Dr. Hamid. I don't know if you just want to introduce yourself quickly.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry, I do apologize on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Wajid. He had to go for urgent emergency. I am Dr. Am Hamid. I'm cardiology consultant at Stepping Hill Hospital, Stockport. I am one of the founding member of BIMA, and I am a council member, ethics leads, and till late Welsh lead in BIMA. I am also voluntary Muslim chaplains for the Muslim faith for the last 20 years, and my specialty cardiology with special interest in cardiac imaging.
Thank you. And just to clarify, BIMA is the British Islamic Medical Association, for anyone who was wondering what that was. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm now going to just move on to the next question, which is around the ingredients in the vaccines. There's a lot of concern that these are not halal, they are not vegetarian, and we also have Ramadan coming up, so that's creating some questions. So I may just bring in Dr. Sandhya to answer this question. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Sure. Well, very important question indeed, with different people wanting to know whether there's any animal products. If you're vegan, vegetarian, or if you question about whether it is halal, the answer is yes, it is vegan, yes, it is vegetarian, yes, it is halal, because there's evidence that there is no animal products on these vaccines. So that's a simple answer to your question, hopefully.
Thank you. I wonder, Dr. Hamid, whether you would be able to just say a few words about Ramadan. I know there's some concerns about having the vaccination during that period.
Yes, sure. Obviously, we as a British Islamic Medical Association, we encourage the authorities to have the jab preferably before Ramadan. But we have already issued a statement that if your jab as a Muslim comes in Ramadan, it is permissible to have the jab, and there is no problem from Islamic perspective to have it. I personally, my second jab will be just a few days before Ramadan, but we've issued a statement. We have asked our Muslim brother and sister that it doesn't matter if you have it in Ramadan, it's still safe. But obviously the second one will be slightly the higher dose. So if you need to take one day probably off, or will you take that jab?
Thank you very much. Okay, so there is also some concern as well about if you delay your jab because of Ramadan, you know, that it'll then be more difficult to get it. I wonder, Manisha, could you say something about that?
Of course, Benita. So we've started vaccinating as many people as possible with their first dose, and that was the government guidance, as it was so important to get the majority of people vaccinated with some vaccine. The second dose is just as important, and as Nithya said, you know, that the immune response is triggered by the first, and that booster response is really important for the second. All the trials have been done between sort of 4 and 12 weeks for having that second dose. What I really would like people is to make sure they do have that second dose within that time, even if it falls in Ramadan, because by delaying it, it may reduce their immunity to COVID and then make them more vulnerable. And what we want to do is avoid that. So keeping it to within that 12 weeks is really important. Also, whenever you're asked to come for your vaccination, be it your first or be it your second, you know you have the support of everybody here on the panel to go and have that done. Side effects are minimal. We've all had it done. I had a sore arm. I had a little bit of a temperature, but it was one day. And to me, that a reassurance that gave me some coverage against COVID was much more important. So don't wait, don't delay, just have it done as soon as you're called in.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. So next, there's been a number of questions that have kind of come in around who can have the vaccine, who can't have vaccine. So we've had questions. I have allergies. Can I take the vaccine? I'm assuming that's kind of just dog, cat, dust allergy type things. We have had a question that somebody had anaphylaxis in the past and was rejected for the AstraZeneca vaccine. So Dr. Singh, I wonder if you could say a few words about can and can't have the vaccine.
Thanks, Benita. So the main take-home message here is that there are very few individuals who cannot receive one of the approved vaccinations by the MHRA. They are the Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna, and the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccinations. Now, you may remember when the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was the first one to be approved in the UK by the MHRA, a small number of individuals experienced anaphylaxis when they were vaccinated. Now, following close national surveillance, the MHRA is no longer advising that individuals with a history of anaphylaxis to any vaccine, medicine or food do not get the vaccine. So there's quite a lot of double negatives in that sentence. So in plain English, that means that unless you've got a history of a systemic allergic reaction or anaphylaxis to the ingredients of the specific vaccine, then you shouldn't receive it. However, those with allergies such as food allergies, dust mite allergies, general allergies can safely have the vaccine. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in the detail, but there are two vaccines, the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna mRNA vaccines, which contain a certain ingredient called PEG or polyethylene glycol. And this is contained in many different products which we use commonly around the house and in certain cosmetics. And if you've got a certain allergy specifically to PEGs or polyethylene glycol, which is very rare, then the MHRA are saying that you shouldn't have those two vaccines, or if you've had a previous allergic reaction to PEG. But again, this is very rare. And so general allergies to common household products or any dust mites or seasonal allergic rhinitis, anything like that, all the vaccines are the ones that have been approved in the UK are very safe to have. There is a more detailed breakdown in the Green Book. They've RAG rated it and given a green, amber and red rating. But the simple message is that unless you've got a specific allergy to PEG or the excipient ingredients to one of the vaccines, then it's safe to have it.
And I think it's important to note as well, Dr. Singh, that over 14 million people have now had the vaccine, and actually the reports of anaphylaxis incredibly rare. We have, because there has been one or two reports, added the safety net that people should be observed for 15 minutes after a routine vac. If you've had any history of severe allergic reaction to anything, that's extended to 30 minutes. And everybody in the vaccination centres are trained in how to treat anaphylaxis. And I cannot tell you how horrific COVID-19 as a disease is. And, I think these risks are very, very tiny. So if you have been rejected for a vaccine, please have a discussion with a healthcare professional about an alternative. Would you agree with that?
Benita, I don't know whether you can hear me. The point that you're making is really, really important. I mean, it's perfectly legitimate that people do have concerns about whether this will happen, that will happen, short term, long term. But every single one of those concerns have to be weighed up against the immediate risk of getting COVID, which I see every day. In fact, I've just disconnected somebody from from the ventilator and things like that, because it's such a horrible disease. So it is legitimate to have these concerns, but weigh them up against what is it that you are putting yourself into. That's the key message that I would like to convey.
Can I add something on that?
Please do, yeah.
Just recently, yesterday, actually, the report from US that there was only 66 cases of anaphylaxis in 18 million vaccine. The percentage is 0.003, and there is no death. So this is very reassuring result that I think, in my opinion, like Dr. Carter said, unless you have the EpiPen and you use the EpiPen for a severe allergy that if you had the allergen, you will drop like collapse or faint, then you are allowed to take the vaccine, obviously with the proper discussion with your specialist and GP, how much risk you have.
Also worth adding there that if you look at the experience, collective experience of the vaccination program, I think it's fair to say one of the countries that looks after or it's very, very concerned about the immediate and long-term safety of their citizens is actually Israel. You may not agree with Israel politically, but it is a fact that they look at their people very, very carefully for historic reasons. And the vaccination uptake and the very vigorous way in which vaccination is being promoted and taken up in Israel speaks volumes for its potential safety. I think it's a very pragmatic way of looking at it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your comments on that. There has also been a question about, can you have the vaccine if you're on blood thinners or, you've been treated for thrombophilia? The answer is yes. And there's specific training just about adding additional pressure, but there's no problem at all around that. So next, we're going to move on. I'm keen to get through as many of the questions as possible. We've got lots and lots coming in on the chat as well. So there's some concerns about how something that has been developed so quickly can be safe. Usually vaccines take a number of years for production, and there's some concerns this has been rushed. The testing hasn't been done properly. So I wonder, could I bring in Dr. Ali to comment on this, please?
Sure, thanks, Benita. So I've been somewhat kind of involved with the Oxford vaccine with colleagues in Oxford in the development of that and the clinical trials. But I've also reviewed the data from the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. And the main reason that these vaccines have been able to develop so quickly is partly to do with funding. So there's an unprecedented amount of funding that's gone in. It's partly because many of these technologies have already been developed for other diseases. So the mRNA technology had already been developed for cancer. The Oxford vaccine had already been developed for other viruses. So we weren't starting from scratch. The clinical trials have been done in the normal way for any vaccine. They've had their so-called phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials to establish safety, efficacy or effectiveness. And then finally, the phase 3 trials show that they do reduce disease and deaths. So there were no shortcuts taken. The main reason it was possible to do it quickly is because, unfortunately, COVID is such a common disease that there was thousands of people who were developing the disease over that time period. So, for example, the meningitis vaccine, which is one of the recent ones approved, took years to develop because meningitis is a very rare disease. So it takes time to have enough people being exposed to meningitis and catching meningitis. Whereas for COVID, literally, you were getting tens of thousands of cases every day across the world where these trials were being done. And the other thing is that in terms of volunteers, fortunately, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were willing to volunteer for these trials, which again is unusual. So this was a great thing that we're able to get people to volunteer, and they were able to get enough events, infections within a short period of time. But as I said, no shortcuts were taken. So we don't have any concerns that we're missing, short-term side effects. Even we could say medium-term side effects now. People have been having the vaccine for more than 6 months. As is already mentioned, more than 100 million people worldwide have now had the vaccine. If there were any major short-term side effects, we would definitely know that by now. We've got lots of experience from many countries, so we can be reassured that there are no major short-term side effects. I mean, when I had the vaccine, actually, I had to take a couple of days off work. But again, what's that compared to potentially being on a ventilator or even dying from COVID? So it's weighing up those things. So there's another question here about how many they've been tested on. I mean, across the different trials, I think now we're up to about 200,000 people that have been involved in clinical trials for the vaccine, which is really much higher than any other vaccine developed before, higher than the HPV vaccine for cervical cancer, higher than the flu vaccine. So it's really unprecedented the number of people that have been trialed. So really, we should not have any concerns. The other final point, in terms of vaccines in general, it's extremely rare for a vaccine to have either medium or long-term side effects, and it's almost unheard of. So again, we shouldn't be worried about that. It's generally only short-term side effects that they have.
Thank you very much. And I think it's important to say that it's not like we're not collecting data now. There's been 50 million people vaccinated. There's lots of trials ongoing, measuring the response in different age groups. There's now trials in children. And we are being encouraged to report anyone who develops COVID if they've had the vaccination. Of course, we know there's a 2-week period before you have full immunity and you can get COVID in that time, but that's been shown to to not cause severe disease. So the work is still ongoing, and the trials, this has been approved in record time because the red tape has been massively reduced, and certain stages of the rigorous testing has been done in parallel, whereas it wouldn't, because of the pressing need. So really, this is a sign of how quickly we should really be developing vaccines, and how it's possible to develop them in a shorter space of time when everyone's invested in it, rather than saying it's been rushed. It hasn't been rushed. It's been through, I've worked in clinical trials. There is rigorous testing.
Benita, just worth adding, Dr. Ali touched on this, the basic technology, particularly the use of mRNA-based vaccine technology. The first papers were published in 1990, so we have got quite a lot of collective experience in the base underlying technology that's time-tested. So therefore, that argument that, how was it rushed through, that doesn't really hold water, because the technology is well tested. And also, I don't believe that thoroughness and speed are mutually exclusive. If humanity wants it, it can be done. You can do a thorough job very quickly, and that's important message to convey. Speed doesn't mean that shortcuts were taken.
Lovely. And I just wondered whether there has been concerns about whether the vaccines work in older persons. We know about France's decision around the vaccines around older people. We've got a different stance in the UK. Dr. Ali, do you have any comments on that?
So the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines actually had a good proportion of older people in them, and the efficacy or effectiveness of the vaccines was equally good in older groups. The AstraZeneca vaccine does have older people in it, and the early data that we have also shows that they're effective in older people, those above the age of 65. But it didn't have as many participants that have developed disease as some of the other trials. So we're still waiting for that information from the clinical trials to come through. But what we do have is our kind of real world experience from the UK now. So of the millions of people that have been given the AstraZeneca vaccine, who have all generally been in the older age groups, we already have data. It's not published yet, but we already have data about very good effectiveness of the vaccine in older people. So there should be no concerns about that.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Now
Can
another.
I add a
sorry.
point in this one? Yeah.
Please
I mean, the statistic about the vaccine efficiency. Now, talking to the public, I think we have to consolidate the message that all the vaccine, they work well. The level of efficiency of the vaccine are beyond what is the acceptable, and definitely much more than the regular vaccine we take every year for flu. So be safe to take them, and the minimum one actually is, the numbers is 82 AstraZeneca. The maximum one obviously is Pfizer, 95. But because the statistic of doing is different, the way they follow people and the way they've done it, that's the number. But all of them are safe.
Thank you, Dr. Hamid. I'm going to just move on to another question, which we've had a few different questions submitted about, and I noticed somebody's also put it on the chat. There's been a lot of concern that the vaccine can affect fertility. That's not just in women, but also in men. And I wonder, Dr. Hack, if you could perhaps address some of those concerns.
Yeah, the simple answer is it doesn't affect fertility. I think that's the important thing. The Royal College of Obstetricians, Gynecologists, the Royal College of Midwives have issued a statement on that, reassuring. Now, the concern has been about something called syncytin-1, which is used for in the body for placenta formation. So the worry was these mRNA vaccines were going to produce this protein that was going to be recognized in the bloodstream for the antibodies to be produced would be similar. And so the immune system would also attack syncytin-1 as well. The bottom line is they're not the same. So going back to what Professor Nitya was saying, that the idea of, and it's not the case with my kids, because they never listen to anything I say, the instruction given to one of your kids is the analogy of the vaccine. There's another kid who's syncytin-1, and they're not interacting with each other. So it's completely two separate things. And in animal studies, there's not been any kind of evidence of an effect on the reproductive system either. I mean, in terms of pregnancy, sorry, is it okay, Benita, if I just quickly touch on pregnancy as well?
Please do, yeah, there's been questions about that too.
Yeah. So in terms of pregnancy, I think I want to reiterate what all my colleagues have been saying. COVID is the danger, not the vaccine. COVID, that's the killer. And in pregnancy, particularly in the final third trimester, there's a higher risk of severity of death or complications due to COVID. Now, in any kind of vaccine, you can't do studies ethically on pregnant women. They have to be all observational. But so far, they're not finding those worries or concerns there. So it's a discussion, especially if you have a high risk and you're in the category that needs vaccinated. Really consider having that vaccination, particularly in the third trimester of pregnancy. And the vaccine is similar to the vaccines that pregnant women are having already. The flu vaccine, the one for whooping cough, and things like that. These are not active viruses. These are they don't replicate inside the body. So I would reassure about infertility. Don't worry, that's not a concern. Forget about syncytial 1 and reading up on it on social media, because I know that I do know I am known to dabble in social media a bit, and I do know that is something that is occupying people's minds. And with pregnancy, just think about the risk and the benefit and how harmful COVID itself can be.
Thank you, Dr. Hack. Your sound was coming in and out a little bit there, so I hope everybody caught that. I mean, I was pregnant during the swine flu epidemic, and I was on the front line and looking after respiratory patients. It was quite terrifying. I had my swine flu vaccine as quickly as I possibly could during my pregnancy. Obviously, we don't have the safety data for these vaccines, but there's no reason to think that they will cause harm. And as you have said, that having COVID-19 during pregnancy will cause more harm. So you've got to weigh up the risks and the benefits. Anything to add to that from the other panel members?
Benita,
just wanted to touch on that. Sorry.
Dr. Singh first, then we'll have Dr. Nirmalan.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to say this is of significance, special importance to me, because my wife was pregnant throughout the pandemic with our third child, and she's a frontline healthcare worker in the NHS at our local hospital. We had a lovely, healthy baby girl 13 days ago, and I want to echo what Dr. Hack has just said. COVID is the main risk for pregnant women, and you're always going to have difficulties with clinical data when it comes to trials in pregnancy, because obviously it's not ethical and moral to conduct studies in pregnant ladies. But obviously we have to use the real world data and the observational data, and so far there's no known harm to pregnant women, but although the JCVI have not recommended the routine use of COVID-19 vaccinations during pregnancy, they've advised that for those women who are at high risk of exposure to COVID-19 and that cannot be avoided, or where the woman has underlying health conditions that put them at high risk of developing serious complications, they should then weigh up the risks and benefits of the vaccine and discuss it with their doctor. So it's of great importance. And just a final point, if a woman finds out that she's pregnant after she's had her first dose of the vaccine, she can complete the vaccination during pregnancy if she's considered high risk, or alternatively, it should be offered as soon as possible after pregnancy, after the birth. And breastfeeding, there's no known risk. So the JCVI recommends that breastfeeding women are offered the vaccination with any of the approved vaccinations in the UK.
Hello, can you hear me?
You're on mute. Yeah.
Oh, first time I've done it. I was doing so well. Dr. Nirmalan, would you like to come in? Thanks, Dr. Singh.
Yeah, you're only human, Benita, so don't worry. In terms of the pregnancy side, I mean, what I wanted to share was the personal experience of seeing somebody with COVID pregnant in the ICU. The sheer emotional weight and the sheer scale of tragedy that you see in a scenario like that is something that that will continue to haunt me for a long, long period of time. So the point that the two speakers made, it is the COVID rather than the vaccine that's the main issue, is really important and cannot be overstated. The second point about fertility and the long-term issues, I just look at it very pragmatically. If there is even the slightest of concern with fertility and the long-term survival of a group of people, Israel wouldn't be vaccinating its population the rate that it is doing. So for me, they would have looked at every single, I'm not trying to overplay the importance of Israel in the world stage, but in terms of the security of its people for historic reasons, they are very thorough. And I do trust that those concerns that Dr. Huck touched on are theoretical and fanciful rather than real problems that we should be worried about.
Yeah,
Can I
there's
add
a
a
comment.
point? Can I add a
Sorry,
point in this? Yeah, I mean, regarding, I'm a cardiologist. For just a paradigm similar to that, we always in medicine we exclude people when we do research above 75. We use something called beta blocker, which is standard treatment in cardiology. There is only one beta blocker that used above 75, and that's study called senior study, and that is nebivolol, which is not very common. But are we using beta blocker? We always use beta blocker above 75. It's not evidence-based. It's not the best practice if you want to go that, but it is still safe practice. So it is, that's the rationale they haven't used because neither drug nor vaccination is not ethical to be used for pregnant ladies or for children. But that doesn't mean that is not the case. They are not safe. That's why the Royal College of Gynecologists statement that it's safe to use in high-risk ladies.
Yeah, we've had a comment from Sanjay Agarwal, who's a respiratory consultant in Leicester, who said, sadly, we've seen many pregnant women who become very sick in ITU. Much better to get the vaccine than risk not having it if you're pregnant. And, you know, I too have been involved in some very, very sad cases, as I'm sure Dr. Nirmalan has. So let's move on. Thank you very much for those very comprehensive answers about that. There is also absolutely no evidence that fertility is affected in men, and that's important to raise as well. So the next set of questions were really around the effectiveness of I can see there's some lively chatting going on about that and debate going on. So how effective is vaccine after the first dose, and why do we need two? Can I bring in Dr. Manisha Kumar for this one, please?
Thanks, Binny. I think we've touched on some of the figures that are floating around in the media. And when I speak to my patients who are undecided, it's trying to navigate those numbers that overwhelms them. They go, is it 50? Is it 70? Is it 90? And I think the take-home message for me is that all vaccines licensed in the UK are effective. They're not effective straight away. They take up to 22 days to have an effect. So just because you've been vaccinated, it doesn't give you immunity. That second dose is really important in the window that you've been asked to have it. And then it's about 7 to 14 days after that second dose that you get the maximum impact of the vaccine that you've had. You don't need to choose between the two. Both are really effective, and the importance is to get them out as quickly as possible. However, with both vaccines, neither of them are 100%. And so it's only one of the tools that we've got as a country and as a world to get ourselves out of the COVID pandemic and out of lockdown. So even with the vaccine, it's important to do all the public health messaging that I know has almost become part of our lives, but possibly not so much in some of our communities as they are in our non-BAME communities. So making sure that you wash your hands, the space, only seeing immediate members of your family, not having large gatherings, places where you could be exposed to wider people, giving yourself that space, that 2 meters, using hand sanitizer when you can't wash your hands. They're really, really important. And we've almost begun to see them as rhetoric as opposed to real guidance about how we're going to have to live our lives, even with having either vaccine, even with having both doses. I still hear so many patients that, and I'm sure my GP colleagues are the same, they phone up and say, I've had a cough for 5 days, and you go, have you had a COVID test? And they go, well, no, it isn't COVID. I've been carrying on as normal in my job, which is normally being out there with lots of other people. And so that message hasn't got through that if you have symptoms of COVID, you must get tested. You must stay at home until you've been tested. Your family must stay home if you are positive, because that's what's going to help us get out of COVID. And the vaccination is just another tool. Both are effective. Both are more effective after the second dose.
Can I just jump in?
Please do.
Sorry. Yeah, so just to echo what Manisha's saying, something that's been mentioned on the comments was, we're doing lots of messaging in different languages, but a lot of the time the parents or the grandparents listen to the young people. Are we doing messages in English? And everyone is doing messages in English. And these are the key things as take home, that, the washing of the hands, the physical distancing. There's plenty of information out there. But I think the main thing is to really listen to those people that are on the front line, that the experts, those are involved with the vaccine, rather than people's opinions where there is no evidence behind it. And it is hard with this digital age. In the old days, you could get out your Encyclopedia Britannica, and most of the time it's factual and accurate. Not everything, but the most of it was accurate. And I used to have the whole library of it. But now you just Google something in, and you may just go to the first bit, and you go down this rabbit hole which you don't really want to go down. So I would reiterate everything Manisha said, but there is plenty of information out there from reputable organizations and reputable people as well.
Thank you,
Dr. So, Benita, in terms of the effectiveness question, it's worth reiterating that the key questions are these vaccines sufficiently immunogenic? Are they producing the right kind of antibiotics? And the answer to that is an overwhelming yes for all the vaccines that are on the market. They are all sufficiently immunogenic, and they're all producing the right kind of immune responses, whether, I won't go into the details. The next question is, are they safe? And the answer to that, again, is an overwhelming yes. So they are they're producing the right kind of immune responses. They are safe. And then you can go down dissecting the clinical trials. Is it effective in that group? Is it effective in this group? Is it effective in a man of 59 born in a little island in the Indian Ocean? You can go to, the clinical trials are not going to answer all those questions. So the bottom line is that it is sufficiently immunogenic, it is safe, and the philosophy of vaccination has stood over 150 years, and that is very well established. And the disease is a near fatal disease for some people. So that's the balance that you need to strike in making these decisions. Not asking questions like, is it effective in an 85-year-old man who has got a little bit of pot belly, or that's taking evidence-based medicines to silly levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nirmal. And I think it's really important to reiterate here that even though the vaccines aren't 100%, you can still contract COVID. They protect against severe disease. So there's been virtually, I think, no hospitalization or deaths in the group that has had the vaccine. And so, even if it's 70%, 80%, 90%, and you do still have COVID, it protects you from severe disease. And I cannot tell you how important that is, having dealt with so much severe disease. So, it's all about weighing up risks and benefits, this discussion.
Can I add a point for that?
Please, yeah.
Yeah. The bottom line here is that now, alarmingly, the age of people entering intensive care is so lowered now that we are, they talk about efficiency now. Whatever it's efficiency, it at least stops you from dying. At least stop you from going into intensive care with bad COVID. So even if you have it as a mild flu-like illness, then fair enough. At least you survive it. So whatever efficiency is, as it is much better than staying without it, than listening to the wrong information on the media or on the internet saying that this is whatever theory of conspiracy theory.
The other thing is, sorry, Benita. The other thing is we're in a very privileged position in the UK and in other countries, because there is, unfortunately, in globally, many countries who are not getting vaccinated. They don't have access to the vaccines. And we're in a position here where we're debating whether or not we should have a vaccine or not. These countries would desperately want these vaccines to protect their population. And we, through the work of all of my colleagues here and others, can offer it on a plate, the first and the second dose, with minimal risks and things. And if we put it on a global perspective, we're very fortunate to be here, to be having that access.
And very quickly, just to jump in, sorry, Benita, maybe a final point on this topic. is that we should, I agree, we should totally avoid window shopping and playing vaccine top trumps. You know, if it's been approved by the MHRA, it's effective, it's safe, have it. Otherwise, you know, you risk the chances of getting the awful complications, including death, of COVID.
Yeah, I know one of my dad's biggest fears was getting COVID and then being alone and isolated in hospital and dying in that manner. And that was, you know, such a horrendous thought to him. And, you know, he isolated for the best part of a year before getting the vaccine and still isolating till he's had his second dose. But, you know, this is the reality that so many people have faced.
Sorry, a final point, Benita, on this one. Now, if you, on the current rate of administration, we are lucky in UK that we're going to have the whole country vaccinated in 6 months. Now, only as mentioned, Israel will do that and Emirate in 2 months. Now, country like Russia going to be more than 10 years. Indonesia, more than 10 years. India, more than 10 years. So we have to be to appreciate how much lucky we are in UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just Dr. Kumar, before we move on to the next questions, we've had a question saying, how quickly after the first vaccine can I hug my grandchildren? Would you reiterate that?
This one is so hard because I know my parents really want to hug my daughter so much, but in order to keep them safe, not yet. Let's all let the level of COVID go down in the country. And the way by doing that is all the things we've discussed. Get your vaccination, take those precautions. If you're symptomatic, stay at home, get tested. And in time, I think we'll get back to a new normal. I do think we're going to have to live with new ways of protecting ourselves and our family for quite some time. But if we don't have enough of the population immunized that we reduce the rate of COVID, that's just going to take a little bit longer. So the more we pull together, the quicker my father can hug my daughter, and your own as well.
Thank you. And there's a question about, is it safe to go to the hairdressers when they reopen? I think we just have to reiterate, use a mask, social distance, wash your hands, and take lots of precautions, even if you've had the vaccine. Now, I can see a comment that's come in from my auntie Bishaka, who's watching at the moment. And she says, very good discussion, bit too technical at times for the non-medical people. So thank you for that, auntie. Could we just be mindful of that on the panel, please? And let's try and explain things as simply as we can. So the next set of questions, again, around efficacy is, you know, people are confused about, why do you need the vaccine if you've already had COVID? And, you know, does it stop the disease transmission? So can I bring in Dr. Nithya for this and Dr. Nirmalan to answer this? Who would like to go first? Dr. Nithya, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Nirmalan, Dr. Nirmalan, why don't you answer this one?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the transmissibility, I mean, there are various discussions going on. I don't think the final answer is out there yet, but certainly some of the vaccines, there is data coming out to show that it does reduce transmissibility. But if you just look at it from a common sense point of view, transmission of a disease is heavily dependent on the total amount of disease burden that is there in any community. So if any intervention, be it vaccine or be it, you know, it is going to reduce the total amount of disease burden in the community, it will reduce transmissibility. So I think we can be sure that these vaccines will have an impact both on the severity of the disease and also the overall disease burden and therefore the transmissibility. So I think I'll allow Nithya to answer the
Yeah, sorry. I was just pressing the mute and unmute button, not knowing that it hadn't unmuted. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You know, if you ask about this, whether this vaccine would stop disease transmission, the short answer is it does not. So, you know, though the vaccines offer very good protection, remember, as it's been said and reiterated over and over again, these vaccines prevent one from getting seriously ill, okay? And doesn't necessarily stop people from getting infected or passing it on. But the important thing is, the reason why they think this happens is, the assumption is because they feel that the vaccinated people are more likely to produce fewer virus particles when compared to those who have a regular infection, and therefore they are not necessarily able to transmit the severe disease, unlike those unlike those who have not been vaccinated. Therefore, the most important message is that please have the vaccine from the perspective that first, you will be prevented against getting severe infections, which is the most important thing. And also the transmission rate and transmissibility, as Mahesh has just explained, is much lower. So up until then, till, as Manisha said, that till we have an overall rate where the virus transmission is very low in the population, we need to continue with masks, hand washing, social distancing. That's like, as you said, it's not the rhetoric. It's actually, that is the way of life. And we would need to carry it on for quite some time. Thank you.
If you look at it philosophically, I mean, virus is a life form. And we are not here to say this life form can exist or this life form cannot exist. So this concept of sterile immunity, where you get rid of the virus completely, is almost fanciful. So what we are here to do, what everyone is here to do, is to reduce the severity of the disease so that people do not fall seriously ill, causing personal tragedies and affecting the economy adversely. And the vaccines are an effective way of doing that.
And what about this question about people who've already had COVID? So, they say, well, surely you have an antibody response. Why do you then need another vaccine? So could you answer that one as well, Dr. Krishnan?
Yeah, certainly. So the reason being, if you've had COVID, now there are two ways to look at it. One, if you've had COVID and then you're wondering whether you need to have a vaccine. As I mentioned earlier on, the thing is you have antibodies mounted because of COVID. But nobody knows how long it lasts. There are some people who, as you know, or you might have heard, that people have caught the virus at least a couple of times, okay? So they are still susceptible. So perhaps the antibodies do not last as long as we need it to be. Therefore, these COVID vaccines, it's tested at least to 6-8 months is what they've said, that these antibodies are protective, and it lasts for this long time. And obviously, this is going to be one of these like influenza vaccines, which we would need to have it on a yearly basis, the way it's going right now, because of the duration of the antibodies that are lasting in us after the vaccine.
Okay. Thank you. So, I mean, we did the big study in Manchester. In fact, I was a subject on it around antibody response after COVID, and it did show that they start to wane after about 6 months, but it does vary between individuals. So the best thing, and we'll all be familiar with vaccination and having boosters. It's just about boosting an immune response and making sure your body can continue to recognize the foreign virus as it comes in. So it makes sense why people are confused why they have to have the vaccine if they've had COVID, but it's because the immunity doesn't last forever, and there's no harm in having a booster. And there's a question that's come in around, if you've tested positive, how long before you can have the vaccine? So are you able to answer that for us?
If you've tested positive, usually you wait for about 4 weeks is the recommendation. When you have an active infection, it's best is not to have any vaccines for that matter, any active infection. So the recommendation for COVID vaccine is if you've had a positivity or if you're symptomatic, please wait for 4 weeks till after you've recovered to have the vaccination.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. So there's another question that came in saying, well, can you catch COVID from the vaccine? So Dr. Nirmalan, are you able to address that one?
Yes, the answer is no, you can't catch the COVID from the vaccine because COVID is transmitted by the virus. The vaccine does not include we are only injecting components of it or signals that are protective. So you cannot catch the COVID from through vaccination.
Can I add something to that? So the catchphrase here, as if you got somebody told you that this car that coming to you have some bomb in it, what you have is just the badge of Mercedes, not the whole Mercedes, so it will not harm you. So it's just the badge of that. That's what the code of the virus that been presented by the vaccine to the immunological system of the body to do something to counteract it. So it doesn't cause that.
Yeah. Okay. Can I just add one more point, Benita? It's very important to remember that vaccines do not and cannot give COVID infections because they do not contain live viruses. So therefore, there's no way it can multiply in us.
Yeah, I think the advice is that, you may get a temperature for a few days, but that should settle after you've had the vaccine. So if you've got a prolonged temperature or symptoms that last longer than a few days, it's likely that something else is going on. So just to be aware of that. And there's been a number of questions that have come in around the side effects of vaccines. So Dr. Bhattarai, would you like to say something about this? People are concerned about the side effects.
Certainly. Of course, that is perhaps the question that will come to people's mind, particularly if you're going to vaccinate yourself or loved ones with other health problems. And it has been quite mentioned a few times already today. The most common side effects that have been reported both for Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines are the pain at the injection sites, a sore arm for a couple of days, or sometimes swelling on the injection site as well, some tiredness, fatigue, headache, muscle and joint pain has also been reported, and sometimes fever for, again, a few days. Again, this can be explained with the understanding of how vaccine works, and therefore your immune response to the vaccine itself, resulting in these symptoms. And that's how it's been explained. In terms of these side effects, evidence have come from clinical trials, and also actually, so now with mass vaccination that's been going on, MHRA is collecting information actively through what we call a yellow card scheme. So every public that have been vaccinated can go to the website. There's a COVID-specific yellow card scheme going on, so that people, if they have had any kind of symptoms following having had the vaccine, the information is collected and looked at individually, and therefore the mass overwhelming data so far suggests these are the most common side effects. We've already talked, Dr. Carter's kindly talked about the more severe reactions, so allergic reactions and anaphylaxis quite clearly, so I won't go to that. But the evidence of the most common side effects are quite simple, and risk versus benefit, I think getting a vaccine versus having COVID infection itself, I'm sure will be weighed, and vaccination is what I would recommend.
Another question, sorry, Benita. Another question that frequently people ask is, the virus has been around only for 1 year. The vaccine has been around for shorter than that. How do you know that the long-term side effects are safe? How do you know that? That's a very common question. Now, people who raise that question always, I mean, if you read some of the social media, they say that in a biological system, small changes, like a small piece of DNA or small piece of this or small, can in the long term amplify themselves into unpredictable effects. And therefore, what is the rationale in asking me to take a vaccine that has been only around for a couple of months? Now, the key point is that kind of reasoning, that kind of question can be raised about almost everything that we do, whether it is pesticides in the vegetables that we eat, or the hormones that you inject into the in the meat production, or the hormones that go into various poultry product, or whatever. That kind of non-linear questioning can be raised virtually about everything. So you need to balance that kind of tangential argument against vaccination against the immediate risk of catching something which is going to kill you or your loved one. So that's what I would say, because we can't say that kind of long-term concern is an invalid argument. Of course, there is validity in, but it is the same as, how do you know that eating vegetables is safe, or how do you know eating poultry products is safe, or how do you know that eating yogurt is safe? So
Thank you.
it's the risk balance that you need to take into account.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And there's a risk of taking a paracetamol. That's we know that, but it's tiny. So I'm just conscious we've got about 5 minutes left. That has gone really, really quickly. And there's hundreds of questions that have come in through chat that we can't answer. What we are going to do is we're going to collate the questions, and we are going to create a Q&A section, and we'll post it on our website. We'll also post lots of resources. There's been some comments that, why is this in English? Well, unfortunately, we've got so many different dialects and so many different South Asian communities, we couldn't not do it in English, but we will be signposting you to resources in different languages, and we will be putting all of that on our website, and I'll let you know when that happens. Just as a final couple of minutes, I'm going to just ask the panel, what do you think that people can do to dispel all this stuff that's circulating on WhatsApp and Facebook that is putting people off having this potentially life-saving vaccination? I'm going to bring in Dr. Kumar. You've been responsible for a huge program in Manchester. What can individuals do?
Thanks. It's a really good question. So when we invite people in, 3/4 will come in off their own bat. Another 10% will come in when we phone them up and get them in. And then there's a few that really need that detailed conversation. And there's only so many of us, and we're talking to all our patients as well as vaccinating them. So for me, the biggest thing you can do is talk to each other about what you've heard today. Share the truth, as well as sharing some of the questions and answers that we've raised, so people can really understand how important it is. So the main way of getting into our communities is people. It's that sphere of influence every single individual person has. Keep that conversation going. If you're not sure, look it up. If you're not sure, phone your GP. We are more than happy to answer any queries. There's no such thing as a silly question, but don't sit at home worrying about something if it's stopping you getting vaccinated. So let's use all of us to get vaccination out there.
Thank you. And Dr. Hack, there's been a lot of talk about the older generation in particular being particularly hesitant. And of course, they are at the highest risk of dying from COVID-19. Is that your experience? I know you have Bangladeshi background.
Yeah. I mean, there's that joke about WhatsApp spreading misinformation and things. And I would just say what Manisha's just said. They will listen to the people closest to them. They're the people who have the most influence there. So even if we can't reach the older generation, the younger generation definitely can. And that empowerment, because I think I'm a firm believer in patient empowerment, and that's how the modern NHS, the healthcare system works, is that we are the facilitators of information as clinicians, healthcare professionals, but it's the patients and their families who are the ones that are empowered. So if from this, and I'm just reiterating what Manisha just said again, if from this, you get clarity in your mind about what is the truth about the vaccine, then relay it in your own language, in your own way, to those that trust you the most. And that's the older generation and other members of your family.
Thank you. I'm going to just bring in Dr. Hamid just to say a few words about that as well. What can we do in the Muslim communities to encourage people to have the vaccine?
I mean, before the Muslim community, I'll say as a human beings, the main criteria is two things. Number one, to be honest. And number two, to be seeking to learn about problems. So we are here discussing all of this, giving numbers, saying that we are honest about information. We're not saying blank, everybody take it. And when there is something coming, we will highlight it, as the government did, that this is this is that, this is strain, this might not be. Be honest about that. On BIMA, I think if you visit the website of British Islamic Medical Association, we already produced that not only in English, but Urdu and Arabic. We're now planning on the French, Turkish, German, Polish, and Kurdish. So we're trying to do our bit about the myth and to trying to go to the grassroots. Please direct people to Islamic Medical Association. You don't have to be Muslim for that. It's just about information about COVID, whether you have faith or non-faith. It is information for you to have a trusted information from trusted professionals. Listen to that. Thank you.
Thank you. We've just got time perhaps for Dr. Singh to say something very briefly.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that with this pandemic, none of us are safe until all of us are safe. So we have to take our personal ownership and responsibility, protect yourselves. And by doing so, you're protecting the whole of the community with the herd immunity. And we need to also be aware not to stigmatize any group. So we can't say, oh, the Asian community or the Black community aren't having their vaccinations. That's untrue. Everyone's playing their part. So we need to avoid stereotyping, stigmatization, and further deepening any mistrust which may be present among certain communities between themselves and the powers that be. And just to reiterate that the vaccine is the safest vaccine out there. Well, the three which have been approved, the safest vaccines out there. They're efficacious, and we should all have them to protect ourselves. They're not the be-all and end-all. They are one part of the bigger jigsaw puzzle in reducing transmission.
Thank you very much. And that's a really nice note to finish on. I think this is bigger than just any one of us. This is about all of us working together, not just in the UK, but globally to try and get ourselves out of this situation. So it just remains for me to say a massive, massive thank you to the panelists for giving up your time, and also to Prerana Issa, who was our guest panelist earlier, Dr. Hamid for jumping in after the session had started and doing such a great job. So thank you. Thank you to everybody who signed up for the event, everyone who's just jumped on watching the live feed, and for all your questions. As I say, we will be collating those. We will be signposting you to some resources after the event. And finally, our first South Asian Heritage Month was launched last summer, entirely online, and by the end of the month, we had made 86 million impressions globally and reached over 30 million individual people. We want to make 2021 bigger and better. It's going to run from the 18th of July to the 17th of August. Please get involved and keep an eye on our website, www.southasianheritage.org.uk, for ongoing information about what we've got planned. So thank you very much, and I will say goodbye.